Good afternoon. Welcome back to panel 5 of theme 1. Panel 5 is titled Forging a Constitutional Culture and Consciousness. In this panel, we hope that the range of panelists will address in their own ways what are the challenges in the building of a constitutional culture and consciousness. This panel is the 5th in a series on the 75th anniversary of the Constitution. We started yesterday afternoon with a panel exploring the relationship between constitutionalism and democracy in the 21st century. We then moved through panels on equality and equity, India's federalism, and this morning we began in panel 4 with an inquiry into institutional safeguards around democracy. This 5th panel looks beyond institutional measures. It looks to the problem of culture, and we are trying to explore how do we understand the creation of a constitutional culture at this moment? What have we done across the last 75 years to be where we are today? It is commonplace that if we ask young and old alike, what has produced the social and personal circumstances in which they live, that the Constitution is very unlikely to emerge as one of the reasons why we enjoy the freedoms and the lives that we lead. This inability or the invisibility of the Constitution in the creation of India's post-colonial life is one that needs to be urgently remedied. If we are unable to tell the founding conditions of this republic and its relationship with where we are today, we are unlikely to create the conditions for the sustenance of the republic into the 21st century. So the thematic that we have tried to explore across the 5 panels is to look back and look forward. And I invite the panelists to panel 5 to continue that exercise in ways that they think fit. First, we have Professor Shruti Kapila, a professor of history and politics, and I just request you to come and take your place on the stage at Cambridge University, who will also be our first speaker. Second, we have Professor Mohan Gopal, who is a former Vice-Chancellor of the National Law School and a former Director of the National Judicial Academy. If I can request him to take his place. Professor Anurag Bhaskar is an academic at the Jindal Global Law School, but currently a Deputy Registrar at the Supreme Court. Mr. Bezwada Wilson is not joining us this afternoon, so will be not present on this panel. Our 4th speaker is Dr. John Britas, who is a Member of Parliament representing the state of Kerala and also the Managing Director and Chief Editor of the Kairali Television Network. The speakers on this panel will have approximately 10 minutes each, with minor spillovers being my role to guard and to work with. We will then open out to a discussion between the panelists and then to the audience. We have an hour and a half in all. I know that the math doesn't add up, but invariably we will get to 1 o'clock as we get through. So let me start by inviting Professor Shruti Kapila to get us started.
Okay, Thanks very much, Professor Krishnaswamy. Thanks also to you for this warm invitation and to return to, as it were, the hospitality of National Law School and the Karnataka government. I also thank you for giving up your Sunday morning and a day of leisure to come and hear us this morning. Okay, so I've been tasked to speak on the question of consciousness and culture. And I think it's fair to say, particularly even in the discussions yesterday, certainly in the literature, that there is something called the Constitution which has been written by elites, and then somehow it becomes popular, publicly held. Today it is symbolically very powerful, whether it is the CAA agitation or many other instances. And that means that somehow we have to do the work of culture. And this is what Sudhir's point is. I appreciate this, as it were, title. I appreciate the sentiment, but I'd like to question it a little bit, if that's allowed, Professor Krishnaswamy. And to say, actually, this is a false problem. This is not the problem that actually India faces of elites or masses, constitution versus something else, but rather, the issue is the relationship between politics and law, and that actually consciousness of the Constitution actually belongs properly in the domain of politics, and that is how it has always been. India's Constitution is exceptional in very many ways, not simply because it is bold, audacious, gave rights to people who never had, or that it is the longest, it comes out of the national freedom struggle, all those things which have been celebrated from the get-go, not only by Granville Austin, but adherents of it latterly. I would actually like to pose the problem that actually the issue is what is the relationship between politics and law, or democracy and law, and really what is rather the relationship between constitutional power and political domain. And this has really been an issue because unlike other constitutions in the world, the Indian Constitution openly sets up a relationship between politics and law. Most constitutions tend to have a suspicion towards the domain of politics, would like to actually just set the rules of the game in some neutrality, notably, of course, the American Constitution, but also the French Constitution. And the French Constitution, which is, of course, the foundational moment of democracy, all this stuff we see of equality, liberty, fraternity, obviously comes from that moment. I will come to Dr. Ambedkar in a second, but I want to set up the problem as it may be, and why in India reservations is not about jobs or even equality, but it's essential to democracy itself and essential to India's politics. So India is exceptional in the sense that if you look at Hannah Arendt or many others who have written about it, but she seems to be the most eloquent about it, that most constitutions made a gap or separated the realm of the social from that of the political. I.e., which is to say whether it is class struggle, whether it is social inequity, whether it is hierarchy, that issue was meant to be separated from what is called the political realm meaning defense, foreign affairs, legislation. And this division was very zealously protected in both those constitutional cultures, precisely because, as Arendt argued, there is a suspicion that society, any power that comes from society, can lead to tyranny. That if you do not want tyranny in any society, i.e. authoritarianism or unbridled power, you must keep social forces outside the domain of the law. Now, this was exactly, and you must have a political, that i.e. or the political and the social must be separated. And they were separated, as we well know, both in both those constitutions. And the early Indian National Congress of the, Dadabhai Naroji variety, or even Firoz Shah Mehta, or the early constitutionalists were very much of this way of thinking. And this is why they left the domain of social reform to social reformers. Caste was a matter for reformers to go do their bidding, to go do the reform, and the political world will be dealt with a kind of aloofness to society. That would be the best way to put it. This, of course, is taken down with a hammer and broken by none other than Dr. Ambedkar. And it starts right at the beginning in the 1916 Sadbara Commission, which is, the Franchise Commission, which is when the first, as it were, issues are laid out. How are we going to negotiate? I'm saying all this because Ambedkar this is not simply about equality. This is not simply about caste justice, but actually about democracy, because for Ambedkar, that if you do not actually connect the social with the political, India is not just anti-fraternal, or to say anti-social was his word, that the ideal society in India is the anti-social society, or the fact that the highest ideal, i.e. the Brahminical ideal, is to be isolated, to be separated, to be apart. And this militates against association, meeting together, and the like. How are you going to do this on that, as he very famously put it, on this very undemocratic soil? How do you create democracy on this undemocratic soil? To this end, he made two major interventions. One, caste was not seen as a social or an economic entity, which it was. His critique of Marx is also on that basis. But rather, it is essentially a political relationship based in questions of power, violence, and sovereignty. So the issue of sovereign power in India lies not so much with the people, but in caste relations itself, particularly between the Brahmin and the untouchable. It's a very long set of, yesterday we talked about Gandhi and 99 volumes and 10 more to come, but there is a lot of, as it were, writing in Ambedkar, which is precisely oriented not so much to equity, but to sovereignty, to questions of power and violence, and how to kind of create a non-violent culture in what is actually a violent culture between Brahmins and untouchables, and how to end separation. And the way he thought was that he critiqued Gandhi, he critiqued the early Congress, and he said, well, the point is we cannot leave it to the social reformers to change the hearts and minds of people. What you need is the end of separation, and you have to force these two hostile castes, these two antagonistic, violent groups that are at the heart of India's civil war, undeclared civil war, but so violent that it doesn't even need to express itself any longer in violent terms, that they have to face each other. And reservation was that mechanism to actually introduce competition between castes in place of a civil war which had been waged for at least 2 millennia. And you can read my book. I can't quite, detail it out, but he actually goes as far as to compare the Brahminical power to Nazi power, and saying that Brahminical power is more superior because it doesn't even need to display violence. It is that profound. Why is he saying this? Very quickly, the problem, as in the French case, was, what is democracy? Democracy is the rule of equals. Even if you have a constitutional monarch, it's really the rule of all of us. And the idea in the French case was, you kill the monarch, quite literally as the monarch was killed, you discover the people. Democracy, republicanism, the rule of the people as opposed to the rule of the king. According to Ambedkar, and I think he was correct, that this was not possible in India because there was no unitary monarch in India. You had lots of kings, you had lots of sovereigns, but actually there was an immortal sovereign in the figure of the Brahmin, which was a dispersed monarchy in India. And this is why if you do not, as it were, get rid of that form of sovereign power, you are not going to get democracy in India. And that is why he then institutes reservation as a forced dialogue and competition between castes. Having said all this, and in some ways, he has proven to be actually correct. We can go on and talk about him and his differences with Gandhi, but ultimately, he won. Ambedkar won over Gandhi in the long term because India's multi-party democracy has taken the form of caste. So if you look at post-Congress monopoly of power in the mid-70s, if you look at Samajwadi Party, if you look at any party in India, barring the BJP, and I will come to that in a second and conclude with that, and where might be the challenge with Ambedkar's issue. The issue is that all our multi-parties are caste parties, and they're especially OBC parties. And in that sense, Ambedkar's, as it were, architecture of democracy has come out to be true. There is only competition amongst castes, and that is what democratic competition looked like till the emergence of Hindu nationalism under Modi. And what this did is, of course, it also disallowed the Hindu majority to become a political majority. This was a second issue that Ambedkar was trying to deny, was that the Hindu cannot have a political majority simply because it is numerically superior. So reservations was not, as we think it is today, only about jobs. It was a profound instrument, or the key instrument of, as it were, democracy. It was reserving democracy for India, legislating for democracy in India, and the Constitution was the key mechanism for it. The issue is this, and I will now leave it here. This meant that the Indian Constitution acquired a flexibility which is unprecedented in any other constitutional culture, which means that the Indian Constitution is open to interpretation and reflection by brute majorities, and therefore it is not a fight between majoritarian power today and the Constitution, but rather the Constitution is on one path and Indian democracy is on another path. And the Constitution cannot protect the rise of majoritarianism, though there will be challenges here or there, but the architecture of the Indian Constitution in and of itself does not allow it. Because you have had 100+ amendments. Okay, there's a basic structure, but there is, so that flexibility is both the power of the Indian Constitution, because it was meant to reflect social change and consciousness, changing in consciousness, if I may use that word. But by the flip side, it did not protect, it did not have the protections against brute majorities taking over the constitutional culture. So what today we are witnessing is not a change in the desire to change the Constitution, but rather for the legalization, official recognition of Hindutva under Modi. So that's where I would end, that that's the issue. That the issue is that there's enough consciousness. The issue is that there have not been enough barricades between the political realm and the constitutional realm, which in the founding decade was very useful for India, but it did not safeguard enough against the vagaries of democratic power. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Shruti. Professor Mohan Gopal will be next. Oh, sorry, sir. There's a translation for 2 minutes. Sorry about that. Yeah.
ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ರುತಿ ಕಪಿಲಾ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರು ಸಾಂವಿಧಾನಿಕ ಬಿಕ್ಕಟ್ಟುಗಳ ಕುರಿತು ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತಾ, ಬೇರೆ ಸಂವಿಧಾನಗಳು ರಾಜಕೀಯವನ್ನು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡಿದರೆ ಭಾರತದ ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ರಾಜಕೀಯವನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಜಕೀಯವನ್ನು ಬೇರ್ಪಡಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಜನ ತಿಳಿಸಿದ್ರು ಕೂಡ ಸಮಾಜದ ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳುವಿಕೆಯಿಂದ ಅರಾಜಕತೆಯಾಗುತ್ತದೆ ಅಂತ ಬೇರೆಯವರು ತಿಳ್ಕೊಂಡ ಕಾರಣದಿಂದ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ BR ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಸಂವಿಧಾನವನ್ನು ರಚಿಸಿದಾಗ ಅದು ಸುಳ್ಳಾಗುವುದ ಮೂಲಕ, ಅಂದರೆ ರಾಜಕೀಯಕ್ಕೆ ಸಮಾಜವನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಳಿಸುವುದರಿಂದ ಯಾವುದೇ ಅರಾಜಕತೆ ಉಂಟಾಗುವುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಮೂಲಕ ಸುಳ್ಳು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಅಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ರುತಿ ಕಪಿಲಾ ಅವರು ಹೇಳಿದರು. ನಂತರ ಈಕ್ವಿಟಿ ಮತ್ತು ಸಾವರಿನಿಟಿ, ಈಕ್ವಿಟಿ ಮತ್ತು ಸಾರ್ವಭೌಮತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವರು ಮಾತನಾಡ್ತಾ, ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಈಕ್ವಿಟಿಗಿಂತ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಿ ಸಾರ್ವಭೌಮತೆಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಪ್ರಾಶಸ್ತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಸಂವಿಧಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಸಾರ್ವಭೌಮತೆ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಪ್ರಜಾಪ್ರಭುತ್ವ ಉಳಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಲಾಗುವುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ನಂಬ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿ ಸಾರ್ವಭೌಮತೆ ನಂತರ ಈಕ್ವಿಟಿಯನ್ನ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ತರುವುದರ ಮೂಲಕ ಸವರ್ಣೀಯರು ಅಂದರೆ ಕಾಸ್ಟಿಂದು ಸುಪೀರಿಯರ್ ಆದ ಮಾತ್ರಕ್ಕೆ ರಾಜಕೀಯ ಪ್ರಭುತ್ವ ಅವ್ರದ್ದಂತ ಹೇಳಲಾಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದನ್ನ ಮೀಸಲಾತಿ ಮೂಲಕ ಸವರ್ಣೀಯ ಒಂದು ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಏನಿತ್ತು, ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂದು ಪಾಲಿಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಏನಿತ್ತು ಅದನ್ನ ಒಡೆಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಪ್ರಯತ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಅವರ ಈಕ್ವಿಟಿ ಎಂಬ ಒಂದು ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಳಗೊಳಿಸಿ ಅಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶ್ರುತಿ ಕಪಿಲ ಅವರು ಅನೇಕ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗಳ ಮೂಲಕ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
Thank you, Professor Krishnaswamy, and I'd like to take a minute of the very precious little time I have to compliment Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy for providing such excellent leadership to the National Law School of India and organizing such wonderful events, and including this one. So thank you very much, and for the privilege of my being here, giving me the chance to be here. Very quickly, I want to make a couple of points. One is there is a lot of work going on, as we all know, on the issue of constitutional consciousness all across the world, being approached in different ways, and I'm not getting into that. But I've had to deal with this question a lot, especially in the last 3-4 years, because I'm engaging in this dialogue on the Constitution with very large groups of people. And there what I've learnt is that we need to understand what do we mean by the Constitution, not from a dictionary, legal, political point of view, but what is the essence of the idea of a Constitution for us in India. Now, I'm not going to explain that, I'll just give you my conclusion. Where I have come to is to see the Constitution not as a noun but as a verb, and see it as in the present continuous tense. The constitution of a committee, the constitution of something, right? The process of creating something. So when we say the Constitution of India, we are actually signifying the creation of India, the process of creation of India. Read it like a story on how India is being made. Why do I do that? Because the first words of the preamble are, we the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India. Not having solemnly constituted India, but having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic. That means that India does not exist. But when we say we the people of India, what is that India? So we see there is a juxtaposition right there of two Indias. We the people of India want to constitute India into something else, which it is not. If not, you would not have to constitute it. And it sets out a framework for that process. And again, no time to go into detail. In summary, I see therefore the Constitution as creating, this is Dr. Ambedkar's genius, as a site of struggle between four forces that are present in the Constitution, in the Constituent Assembly, and powerful in our country from that period of constitution making until today. And in simple terms, we can say this is the economic left and the social left, the economic right and the social right. The economic right is basically capitalism and free market. The social right is basically Hindutva forces, the Savarna oligarchy that rules this country. That is the social right. And the economic left is communism, it is socialism, the left was a word invented 30 years before Marx was born, used in the National Assembly in France. So the broad people who stand on the side of the poor, of common people, of common masses, That's the economic left. From an economic point of view, they believe in the ideologies of communism or socialism. And the social left is another group that stands on behalf of the people but demands not fundamental change in production relationships, but sees social relationships as the base of society and wants a fundamental change in the social relationship between people, because they believe that production relationships are only a product of the, economic production relationships are only an outcome of the way in which society is structured. And so we have the social left and the economic left. We now have a situation where the economic right and the social right are working closely together, but the economic left, which has become very marginalized, exists only in my state and virtually, and Dr. Britta's state, and the social left are antagonistic even in that state where both forces are very powerful. So the CPM government opposes the caste census, the CPM government supports EWS, the CPM government allows the non-entry of women into Sabarimala to continue. When I argued in the High Court that a requirement that only Brahmins should be Sabarimala priests were concerned, the government refused to support me and are standing for Brahmins to be maintained as have a monopoly over being priests of Sabarimala in this 21st century. So the economic left is completely confused and is refusing to accept the validity of the demands of the social left. So we are in disarray, but the right is strong. So this is my first point. I want to set the framework. I see the constitution as a site of struggle, and in India we have four major forces. Economic left, maybe in other countries also, but I've only thought deeply about India. Four major forces that are battling with each other. And the economic left is actually the social right. Their position on many of these issues is identical to the social right on the position that I described. So there's a confusion there. Now, the next point I want to say, second point, I only have time for 2 points, is that when we look at the social left agenda, we see two very, very important issues emerging from Dr. Ambedkar and Narayana Guru in Kerala. And those 2 points give us the way forward. And there I pick up from where Professor Shruti Kapila spoke, and we can discuss my comments on that later. But I agree with her that Ambedkar's views on this are very, very fundamental. And what is really fundamental about Ambedkar's view is the demand that he started to make in the 1920s and came to its peak in the first Roundtable Conference in 1930, where he presented a memorandum of 8 safeguards for the depressed classes to the Roundtable Conference, of which 2 were on representation. And in his speech, he said that we are all here for responsible government, elected government, but the depressed classes of this country have an additional demand. And that additional demand is very, very essential to us, and that is a demand for representative government. And his formulation of representation in the legislature and in the executive and the judiciary was not, you did not use the word reservation, did not use the word backward. That came out of the Constituent Assembly negotiation process. But his pure formulation was regulation of recruitment into public services so as to ensure the due and adequate representation of all communities. That was his language. So at the root of the demand for representative government was representation of all communities, because he was recognizing the reality that the Constitution says that India is a union of states, but the reality on the ground in this very diverse country is India is a union of communities, of social communities. And if you destroy those communities, you're going to destroy India. So Ambedkar wanted representative democracy to protect the lifeblood of India, which is the diversity and strength of these communities, but subject them to a normative framework of equality, liberty, dignity, fraternity, which will be binding to all, and they will have to, as they have done many times in history, adjust their norms to fit within these norms. Now that was what Ambedkar did. Narayana Guru, I think I have another...
I have time.
Sorry, I have time, yeah. So Narayana Guru provides another perspective. In 1925, almost 100 years ago, Narayana Guru, on the 11th day after inauguration of the RSS in Nagpur, that was September 27, 1925, on October 9th, 1925, Narayana Guru publishes a statement in a Kerala Comedy newspaper saying that there is no such religion as a Hindu religion. There is no religion called a Hindu religion. Now, he was a great scholar. He wrote many books in Sanskrit. He is a great scholar of the Shastras, great authority of Hindu, so-called Hindu religion. And he says it is the name, it started, as we all know, as a name used to describe the people of this geographical area, but he recognizes a reality and he says that it is today only a name of a religious group, of a group of religions, and he names 11 religions. And those include Vedic religion, the Vedic religion, Puranic religion, Vaishnava religion, Shaiva religion. I won't repeat all 11, but he names these and says these are religions. The Hindu is a name to describe a group name for these religions, and a group name cannot be the name of a religion. Like Semitic group, you have to be Muslim, Jewish or Christian to be a member of the Semitic religion, but you can't say my religion is Semitic. And Narayana Guru says that these 11 religions are so inconsistent with each other, they have common elements, but they're inconsistent with each other, that you cannot belong to more than one of them. You cannot be Dvaita and Advaita in terms of belief, faith, rituals, and so on. And therefore, you have to belong to one of them and practice one of them. Now, the practical difficulty is all 11 believe in untouchability in the Chaturvarnya system. None of these 11 religions have any space for the avarnas. So there is no possibility for them to say, I am in this religion. So he looks at the consciousness of the 85% of India, and he says, I see a people who see divinity in everything. They go to Vaishnava temple, Shaiva temple, they go to every temple, they go to mosque, they go to church, they worship a tree, they worship a snake. They see divinity in anything. They choose to devise their concept of God and what is divine themselves. They retain that spiritual sovereignty. And he says this is a very elevated spirituality. But it has no common name for this. There is no common name for this religion. He says at that time there were 20 crore so-called Hindus. He says there are 20 crore religions. He says Rama's and Krishna's religion are not the same. There are 20 crore religions. And then he says, this, you don't have a common name, but one thing I can say, the common name for this 85% spirituality, this new spirit, is not Hindu. It's not Hindu. Because to be Hindu, you have to belong to one of these 11 religions, and you have to accept that in totality. The essence of the spirituality of these people, of the 85%, is that there's an open architecture. I can believe in whatever I want. So he says, if you need a common name, you need not have it. Why don't you use? And he suggests 3 or 4 names, the most important of which is Manava Dharma. Dharma controlled by each individual Manav, each individual Manushya. Now let me stop there, because what I want to say is, Ambedkar gives us as a counter to Hindutva, representative democracy, where you cannot dominate this country on the basis of Hindutva. And a small oligarchy cannot rule us. Everyone must have representation. That is what the CPM is opposing in Kerala. They won't do the caste census. They will give reservation to upper caste by Jati. The regulation they have issued is called Jati, and it lists all the most powerful Jati, including Mr. Britta's own Jati, as eligible for EWS. So they won't accept that. But Narayana Guru tells us that complementary to Dr. Ambedkar, that we must give representation to every samudayam, sama udayam. He re-theorizes religion as individual opinion. He explains jati is actually the literal Sanskrit meaning of jati is the system of creation of a human, method of creation of a human being. So he rejects jati. It's not a samudayam or a community. So Narayana Guru, with his rejection of Hinduism, that there is no such religion as Hinduism, destroys the fundamental basis on which all Hindutva politics is constructed. If you take away the Hindu religious identity, the entire Hindutva politics collapses. And Narayana Guru is the only person in this country who provides a theological basis for doing that. And so if we take these two consciousnesses that have emerged from non-oligarchic sources. See, today our idea of the constitution is all defined by this social oligarchy. And whether they're English speaking, Hindi speaking, Marathi speaking, Malayalam speaking, doesn't matter. But they all have to belong to an oligarchy of 3 or 4 castes. They are telling us what our constitution is. But here is an alternative voice, an alternative consciousness about the fundamental basis on which society in India should be created. In 1925, I'll end with this, Narayana Guru says the following in this interview, echoing Ambedkar. He says that at different points of time in history, societies face various problems. And when those problems are faced, then someone comes to put forward some normative principle around which society can regenerate itself. So he gives the example of Buddha putting forward the idea of non-violence when violence had become very excessive. Jesus Christ putting forward the idea of love when there was enormous brutality in society. And the Prophet Muhammad putting forward brotherhood, again when there was tremendous fratricide in that region. Then he asked the question, what does India need today? Placing that question at that level, he asked, what does India need today? And he says in 1925, foreseeing the next century, India needs liberation from strife over jati and matam, that is religion. That is, I didn't want to use the word caste because it's jati and varna. It's not a convenient word we can use for discussion, but basically he says India is going to face huge battles over caste and religion, and we have to ensure that that doesn't happen, for which he re-theorizes religion and rejects the very existence of Hindu as a religion, but as it says it's a group name for religions, and provides us rich intellectual consciousness on which to build an effective struggle against the takeover of this country, not by Hindu forces, by an oligarchy. They want to rule by diktat and by an authoritarian, by fiat and by force, and not through democratic forces, because the vast majority are not part of the oligarchy. Dr. Ambedkar gives us representative democracy, complementary to what Narayana Guru says. And with these two ideas, I think if these can be seen as the essence of the consciousness within the constitution, which is a site of struggle that can respond to today's need, then we can meet this challenge. Tomorrow we may find some other element of the constitution, some other struggle that we can use to take the struggle forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get
ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಜಿ ಮೋಹನ್ ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷಣವನ್ನು ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಯಿಂದ ಶುರು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಮಹತ್ವ ಏನು, ವಾಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ಎಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಅಂತ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಸಂವಿಧಾನವನ್ನು ನಾಮಪದ ಮತ್ತು ಕ್ರಿಯೆ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮುದ್ದೆ ಯಾವುದು ತಗೋಬೋದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ನೌನ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದ ವರ್ಬ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ. ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಈ ಚೂಸಸ್ ಕ್ರಿಯೆಯನ್ನು ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ಲೆಫ್ಟ್, ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ರೈಟ್, ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ ಆರ್ಥಿಕ ಬಲ ಎಡ ಮತ್ತು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಎಡ, ಅಂದರೆ ಎಡ ಮತ್ತು ಬಲ ಅಂತ ಏನು ಡಿವಿಷನ್ ಇದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಈಗಿನ ದಿನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಆರ್ಥಿಕ ಎಡ, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಎಡ ಮಾರ್ಜಿನಲೈಸ್ ಆಗಿದೆ, ಹಾಗೆ ಆರ್ಥಿಕ ಬಲ ಮತ್ತು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಬಲ ಸ್ಟ್ರಾಂಗ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅವರು ಅಭಿಮತ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸ್ತಾರೆ. ನಂತರ ಇಬ್ಬರು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಸುಧಾರಕರನ್ನು ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸಿ, ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಬಿ ಆರ್ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಮತ್ತು ನಾರಾಯಣ್ ಗುರು ಅವರನ್ನ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಅವರು ಸಂವಿಧಾನಿಕ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಜ್ಞೆಯನ್ನು ತುಂಬ ಹಿಂದೆ ರೂಪಿಸ್ತಾ ಬಂದರು ಅಂತ 2 ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗಳನ್ನು ಅವ್ರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. 1920ರಿಂದ 1930ರವರೆಗೆ ಅಪ್ ಟು ದುಂಡು ಮೇಜಿನ ಸಭೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗಾಯಿತು ಅಲ್ಲಿವರೆಗೂ ಹೇಗೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಬಿ ಆರ್ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಡಿಪ್ರೆಸ್ಡ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ 8 ಸೇಫ್ ಗಾರ್ಡ್ಸ್ಗಳನ್ನು ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸ್ತಾರೆ ದುಂಡು ಮೇಜಿನ ಸಭೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಮಾತನಾಡ್ತಾ, ನಮ್ಮದು ಯೂನಿಯನ್ ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ರಾಜ್ಯಗಳ ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಬದಲಿಗೆ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳ ಕೇಂದ್ರ. ಈ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳನ್ನು ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕಂತಂದರೆ ಉದ್ಯೋಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಮಾನ ಪ್ರತಿನಿಧೀಕರಣವನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರ ಆಸೆ ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಮತ್ತು ಆಶಯ ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ನಂತರ ನಾರಾಯಣ ಗುರು ಅವರನ್ನು ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸಿ ಅಲ್ಲಿ 1925ರಲ್ಲಿ RSS ಉದ್ಘಾಟನೆಯಾದ ನಂತರದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು 10 ದಿನದ ನಂತರ ಒಂದು ಜರ್ನಲ್ಗೆ ಬರೀತಾರೆ, ಹಿಂದೂ ಧರ್ಮ ಅಂತ ಯಾವುದೂ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅದನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿ ತಿರಸ್ಕರಿಸುವ ಒಂದು ಜಿಸ್ಟನ್ನು ಅವರು ಕೊಟ್ಟು, ಹಿಂದೂ ಎನ್ನುವುದು ಭೌಗೋಳಿಕ ಪ್ರದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ್ದು, ಅದು ಯಾವುದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾದ ಒಂದು ಧರ್ಮ ಅಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅವರು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ನಂತರ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಮತ್ತು ನಾರಾಯಣ್ ಗುರು ಹೇಗೆ ಒಂದು ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಪ್ರಜ್ಞೆಯನ್ನು ನಿರ್ಮಿಸುವಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಹಿಂದೂ ಧರ್ಮವನ್ನು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡಿದ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಾರಾಯಣ ಗುರು ಅವರು ಹೇಗೆ ಅದನ್ನು ತಮ್ಮ ಮಾತುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿಪಾದಿಸ್ಕೊಂತ ಹೋದ್ರು ಅಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಜಿ ಮೋಹನ್ ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷಣದುದ್ದಕ್ಕೂ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು.
Yeah, Professor Anurag Bhaskar is next, please.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. It's an honor for me to share the dais with Dr. Britas, Professor Kapila, Professor Mohan Gopal and Professor Krishna Swami. And thank you for inviting me here. When we think of constitutional culture, I wanted to think about it from a bit of critical perspective of what we mean by constitutional culture. So, as we know that constitutional culture is not a static phenomenon, it keeps on happening. It's a dynamic process which involves citizen participation, and we saw that during the framing of India's constitution as well, that different groups were involved in trying to build a constitution having different values but also uniting on certain values. We saw, and speakers before me spoke about what Dr. Ambedkar had thought about the culture that the constitution should have. And in India, we have been talking about constitutional culture. Scholars have been talking about constitutional culture after the constitution was enacted. And we have been discussing about the role that those citizens who are on the margins have been doing. But I want to say that the Constitution imagines a consciousness which goes beyond what the weaker sections think or do. It extends also to those who are in the positions of power at a social level. So when we think of constitutional culture or constitutional conscience, we must reflect that Constitution was trying to envisage different set of consciousness for different set of people. By creating the ideas of equality, while at one side the Constitution gave representation to the weaker sections, at the same time it also reduced or limited the power of those who were socially powerful. So constitutional culture or constitutional consciousness in that sense is different. On one side, we are trying to bring a consciousness in which the weaker sections could stand for their rights. At the same time, when we think of constitutional culture, we must also think of the powerful in the society, that they need to reflect on their own social and political power and how they benefit from it. And this is because in a post-colonial society like India, we also need to think that colonialism was also benefiting certain set of people in India. I mean, in colonial time, you had Criminal Tribes Act, which declared certain communities as criminals. The people were still being treated as untouchables, but the British courts were also favoring the socially powerful castes. So when we reflect on constitutional culture, we need to be conscious of these things, these layered realities of society, and what constitutional culture should mean. And therefore the yardstick of when we talk about constitutional culture should not be uniform, and we should put different responsibilities for different set of stakeholders. We also see that after the constitution was enacted, there is a constant backlash against the constitutional ideals. and that is coming from the social institutions or the social structures of the society. So how do we balance this? How do we balance, or how do we try to convince the society that we have to move toward constitutional culture and not be governed still by the societal dominant norms which believe in the ideology of past? So therefore there has to be a constant dialogue, and we have to be conscious of the fact that the society is unequal, and we cannot talk about constitutional culture in an abstract way, thinking that the constitution created a caste-blind society and therefore we must think of constitutional culture as only engagement with political institutions. We also have to talk about constitutional culture as the engagement between different sets of citizens, the citizens of the marginalized groups and the institutions. So we have to be broader in our perspective when we reflect on constitutional culture. Then I also wanted to reflect on what would constitutional culture mean for the most marginalized sections of society. You think of a rickshaw puller, you think of a daily wage worker, and you ask them to develop constitutional conscience. So can we expect that from them? So here we need to think about the capability approach or the human development approach and how constitutional culture is linked with it. It is only when we make the most marginalized citizens capable enough to even think about their rights, then only truly we can talk about generating constitutional culture or constitutional conscience. And that is what Dr. Ambedkar has also summarized when even the framing of India's constitution had not properly started. I think you must read his classic work, States and Minorities, where he talks about that even if you give fundamental rights to citizens, but you do not give them the security or dignity of their daily life, you can't expect them to fight for their rights. So we can't really expect our weaker sections to talk about constitutional culture without giving them enough capability or capacity, and different scholars have written about that. The next aspect which I wanted to mention is that the expectation to bring constitutional conscience must really focus on those who are socially and economically powerful. When we are being constitutionally conscious, we must reflect on how the resources of the country, whether it be in terms of politics or economics, are being distributed. For example, it is often the complaint of the Bahujan scholars that those who sit in academic decision-making positions and write about constitutional culture, they do not reflect on the practices of those institutions. If you take the example of some, for example, renowned scholarships, such as Rhodes scholarships, so we must reflect how many Dalits and Adivasis have got those scholarships. Where is the feeling of inclusion in those institutions? So constitutional culture has to talk about these things. We cannot, as I said, talk about constitutional culture or consciousness without talking about real things, how that affects people, how that affects the most marginalized people. Therefore, the idea of constitutional culture or constitutional consciousness must challenge existing structures of social power by promoting a more inclusive and egalitarian vision of society. And when we focus on the inherent dignity and worth of every individual, that they can also succeed irrespective of their social background, irrespective of what we think the standard of merit is, then only we can talk about generating constitutional conscience or constitutional culture. The last point I wanted to talk about is on the aspect of engagement with courts. So in India, we have something called public interest litigation, and when we think about constitutional culture, we often talk about citizens approaching the court, invoking the PIL jurisdiction of the court or the High Court, and we talk about that citizens are engaging with the institution. But this idea of constitutional culture must not be only limited to just going to courtrooms. It has to be much broader. The engagement with courtrooms cannot be in isolation. And if we talk about examples from history, so let me give a comparative example from the United States of America. So we saw American civil rights movement talking about the rights of black community in US, but we must see that their success lies not just in engaging with courtrooms, but also talking about constitutional values at the larger level. American civil rights lawyers would go to communities to talk about what the Constitution means, educate the society about their rights, educate the black community about their rights, while also litigating in courtrooms and engaging with the institutions. And in India, we do not see a rise of organizations such as NAACP in India, which focuses only on advocacy rights of the most marginalized communities. And so we must reflect on why in India we have not been able to generate, or we have not been able to develop a team of lawyers from the Dalit community or from the Adivasi community who could take up their own fights. So the fault somewhere lies in how we think of constitutional culture, how our legal profession has thought of social justice without even giving the agency and capability to the most marginalized of sections of society. So therefore, as I conclude, I say that as academicians, as policymakers, as decision makers, we must first listen to what the common citizens are doing, what the most marginalized people are doing. And the idea of constitutional culture is about engagement with these communities and to act as a bridge, and not just to impose on what we think of constitutional culture on them. And enhancing constitutional culture requires a multi-dimensional approach, engaging with different people. And I wanted to acknowledge the work of scholars, the work of activists, the work of political workers on the ground, who have been invoking the idea of the Constitution, who have been invoking the language of the Constitution in the day-to-day struggle of people, even to get water or even to get the land rights. And I acknowledge them, and because of their work that we can think about talking about constitutional culture today. So with this, I end my thoughts. Thank you for giving the opportunity. Thank you.
ಶ್ರೀ ಅನುರಾಗ್ ಭಾಸ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಭಾಷಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ 2 ಪ್ರಪೋಸಿಷನ್ಸ್ಗಳನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಸಾಂವಿಧಾನಿಕ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರಜ್ಞೆ ಬರಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಬಂದ ನಂತರ ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳು ಸಂವಿಧಾನದಿಂದ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದೆ ಅಂತ, ಮತ್ತು ಹಾಗೆ ಸವರ್ಣೀಯರ ಪ್ರಭುತ್ವಕ್ಕೆ ಕೂಡ ಕಡಿವಾಣ ಹಾಕಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅವ್ರ ಮಾತನ್ನ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸಿದರು. ನಂತರ ಅವರು ವಸಾಹತು ಸಮಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಕೊಲೋನಿಯಲ್ ಟೈಮ್ಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಕೆಲ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಅಂದರೆ ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಕೆಲವು ಎಸ್ ಟಿ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿಗಳನ್ನು ಡಿನೋಟಿಫೈಡ್ ಟ್ರೈಬ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷ್ ಒಂದು ರಿಜಿಮ್ ಹೇಗೆ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೆ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ಹೇಗೆ ಅವರನ್ನು ಬಿಡುಗಡೆ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಕೆಲವು ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕೊಟ್ಟರು. ನಂತರ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಮೈನಾರಿಟೀಸ್ನ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ಬರೀಲಿಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಮುಂಚೆ ಅಂಬೇಡ್ಕರ್ ಅವರು ಬರೆದಂತಹ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಮೈನಾರಿಟೀಸ್ನ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸಿ ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳಿಗೆ ಡಿಗ್ನಿಟಿ ಮತ್ತು ಸಮಾನತೆಯನ್ನು ನೀಡದೆ ಸಾಂವಿಧಾನಿಕ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಯೋಚಿಸಲಾಗುವುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ಮೆಂಟನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ತಳ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳಿಗೆ ಬೇಕಾಗಿರೋದು ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳುವಿಕೆ, ಇನ್ಕ್ಲೂಸಿವ್ನೆಸ್. ಅದು ಇನ್ಕ್ಲೂಸಿವ್ನೆಸ್ ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ನಾವು ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳುವಿಕೆ ಇಲ್ಲದೇ ನಾವು ಸಂವಿಧಾನಿಕ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತನಾಡೋದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕಷ್ಟ ಅಂತಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಅವ್ರು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ನಂತರ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಲಿಟಿಗೇಷನ್, ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ಹಿತಾಸಕ್ತಿ ಅರ್ಜಿ, ಯಾವುದೇ ಒಂದು ದಲಿತ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಏನೇ ಒಂದು ಆಕ್ರಮಣ ಅಥವಾ ಏನೋ ಒಂದು ಆದಾಗ, ಅಟ್ರಾಸಿಟಿಗಳಾದಾಗ ಇದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ರೂಮ್ಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಆ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ಹಿತಾಸಕ್ತಿ ಅರ್ಜಿಗಳು ಬರೀ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ರೂಮ್ಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಸೀಮಿತ ಆಗಬಾರ್ದು. ಅದ್ರ ಬದಲಿಗೆ ಈ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ರೂಮ್ಸ್ಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಲಾಯರ್ಗಳನ್ನ, ಈ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳಿಂದ, ಪರಿಶಿಷ್ಟ ಜಾತಿ ಮತ್ತು ಪಂಗಡದಿಂದ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳಿಂದ ಲಾಯರ್ಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಬರೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನೋಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು. ಮತ್ತು ಯಾಕೆ ಈ 2 ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಲಾಯರ್ಗಳನ್ನ ತಯಾರು ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ? ಆ ಲಾಯರ್ಗಳು ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಮೌಲ್ಯಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತನ್ನ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಜನಗಳಿಗೆ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ. ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಣ್ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ಬಟ್ ಅಮೆರಿಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಥರದ ಮೂವ್ಮೆಂಟ್ಗಳಾಗಿದೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ಹಿತಾಸಕ್ತಿ ಅರ್ಜಿಗಳು ಕೇವಲ ಕೋರ್ಟ್ ರೂಮ್ಗೆ ಅಷ್ಟೇ ಸೀಮಿತವಾಗಿರುವುದಿಲ್ಲ, ಬದಲಿಗೆ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಹತ್ರ ಹೋಗಿ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಮೌಲ್ಯಗಳನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದು ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಮಗೆ ಅನುರಾಗ್ ಅವರು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು.
Dr. Britas.
Thank you, Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy. I am supposed to be the odd man out here. I'm the lone politician here. And that could be the reason why Professor Sudhir Krishnaswamy thought that I should be the last speaker. Because there is an impression that the politician would disrupt the discourse. Nevertheless, I appreciate Professor Krishnaswamy, because he is the one, I feel that, who thinks that education should not be intended to make people comfortable. It actually means to make them think. So he is guiding a great organization, and I am glad to be part of this discourse. My esteemed panelist, legal luminary, Professor Mohan Gopal, like the old saying, tiger can never change his stripes. His congressman came into the fore and he attacked me, saying that. I really wanted to be an activist, politician. At a time he was virtually adored by the congressmen in Kerala before he vanished. I do agree with him, but let me just make a couple of references to set the record straight. We are not against women going to Shabarimala. It was a Supreme Court decision which we supported. It was a Supreme Court decision which withdrew its verdict, or rather stayed it, or kept in abeyance, either of it. Somebody connected with the Supreme Court is there. So, now, with regard to the caste census, neither I or my party is against it. We want to be part of the census, not a state survey. That is what we feel so. In any case, I would support Professor Krishnaswamy when he said, or rather he talked in terms of invincibility of the Constitution, though I am little skeptic about it. According to me, Constitution cannot protect democracy. Only democracy can protect Constitution. If you don't have democracy, there is no Constitution. Many of my colleagues in politics think that just because India has an egalitarian constitution, the democratic discourse will flow like this. Absolutely humbug. That is what is being demonstrated now. Me being a politician, being a member of parliament, I'm sure that many would be expecting me to speak certain realities or truth, which many of them must have camouflaged or put it in their kids' clothes. See, seeing the way in which our politics gets transformed, I'm a little agonized to state that none of our constitutional makers would have envisaged such a situation. Constitution, as Professor Mohan Gopal said, it's a verb. I do that. I do agree with it. But contrary to the expectation that it is going to be a verb in progress, instead of doing, it has turned to be undoing. That is what is being seen nowadays. See, I am a member of parliament who has been suspended for 3 months. So you know what is a predicament of democracy here. 146 MPs were, I would say, retrenched, kept under suspension, and crucial legislations were passed without even the perusal of a standing committee, nor a semblance of a debate in the parliament. I am one person who diligently gives amendments to many of the bills. None of my amendments were taken for consideration because I had the status of a suspended member. And you know which are the bills which were passed? These are not mere legislations which would have impact on the current society, lasting impact, consequences for generations to come. These are legal luminaries in one way or other way. The 3 criminal bills were passed without any debate there. I am unable to spell the name of these 3 criminal bills anyway. I don't know whether even Mr. Mohan Gopal can spell the 3 criminal bills now here. You can. He is one of the rarest beings in South India who can spell the name. I can say that. Even a judge of the Madras High Court was unable to spell the... And today I was privy to an information because I got an invitation from a railway official saying that the Prime Minister is going to lay foundation for Samruddha Bharat railway stations. And these railway stations' names should be inscribed in what language? Not in Kannada, Tamil or Kerala, Malayalam? In Sanskrit. How many Indians speak Sanskrit? And there is a constitutional provision, Article 348, which says that all the laws that are being passed by the Parliament should be in English. Contrary to the articles of the constitutions, the country's discourse is being taken ahead. This is my grouse. Now, I have many quotes of Dr. Ambedkar. It's all often repeated, and I know that most of the legal students, law students would know that. The constitution can work only in the hands of good people. If it is bad people, it would flop. That's what is being seen now, naturally. See, my concerns, I would tell you, constitutional unity, national unity. If you need to have unity in this country, 3 fundamentals need to be ensured. You can dispute me, Dr. Gopal. One is democracy, second is federalism, third is secularism. If you can't ensure these 3 parameters, there is no relevance for this unity. So when you say this is a constitutional unity, so the perusal of this conference or this seminar should be to see the strength of these parameters that are essential for ensuring the national unity, which is the cardinal topic of this seminar. Now, federalism, that has become a joke now. You don't have governors nowadays. You have governor generals nowadays. In Kerala, you have a governor general who goes for road shows. And I am glad that the Government of India gave a security ring of CRPF not to protect the governor, but to protect the people of Kerala from the governor, Dr. Mohan Gopal. I'm glad about that. Now, the fiscal federalism of this country has reached such a level. The Government of Karnataka, which is one of the chief organizers of this seminar, Government of Kerala had to agitate in the capital city the entire entourage of chief minister, ministers, MPs, MLAs. Administratively, politically, financially, there is a concentration of power. The federalism that was envisaged in the constitution is completely tweaked, trampled upon. And I had I would say, blistering argument with the finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. She happens to be an MP from Karnataka only. She says that we give you what you want. I always tell her, we don't want from anything. We don't want anything from you. It's we give you, it's not you give us. We give the resources to you. You are creating an impression that we are all bikari log hain. That's the thing. We want something from the center. No. We want our share, that's all. Karnataka gives 1 rupee, gets hardly 30 paise. Kerala gives 1 rupee, gets 25 paise. Tamil Nadu gives 1 rupee, gets 47 paise. UP gives 1 rupee, gets almost 3 rupees. Bihar gives 1 rupee, gets 7 rupees. I agree, it's an egalitarian society, we need to support everybody. But the 42% of divisi pool that was envisaged by the Finance Commission need to be implemented. If the government wants to circumvent that, they bring cess surcharge, mop up to a question which I asked in Parliament. You know, the humongous amount that was mopped up by Government of India, which need not be divided amongst the states because it was cess and surcharge. 7 lakh crore in a year. That means the effective share of the states plummeted from 42% to 30%. So I talked about fiscal federalism. Let me just come to the political federalism part. There was a Supreme Court judgment which interpreted Article 3. It was on abrogation of 370. I know Professor Mohan Gopal is has thoroughly done homework on that. And many of his discourses, I actually lap it up on theocratic judges and constitutional judges. I think the law students here should go by his propositions or the theory which he has attributed. See, all of a sudden, the basic structure of the constitution has been changed. At a stroke, the Government of India can convert the state of Karnataka as a union territory without even sending a resolution to Karnataka Assembly. You can change the character of a state. So the second part, that is federalism, democracy. Then I will come to secularism. We had a Prime Minister who wrote to the President of India saying that this is a secular nation. That was 75 years back. After 75 years, when I say the doing has become undoing, you have a Prime Minister who gives pran to gods but takes the pran of the people. I understand. When I say it in little pertinently, I know that it should not be. But I always believe that the primary responsibility of the Prime Minister to ensure the lives and livelihood of the people and not the gods. And as per our own belief, the gods will give life to human beings, not the other way. Professor Mohan Gopal, am I correct? Should be the other way. So you have a Prime Minister who didn't have time to go to Manipur, which is one among the 28 states in India. He has enough time to come to Kerala to attend a wedding so that a prospective candidate is contesting from Tryst. He has enough time to go to railway stations to flag express trains. So the plight of the secularism, that's what I'm saying, the third pillar which I said. I am a member of Parliament. I was ashamed to see the new Parliament be inaugurated with the symbol of Shengol. When I say Shengol, I am per se not against Shengol. But an impression is being created that this country got independence not on account of the struggles, not on account of agitations, by the congressmen, by the communists, by all social reformers, but by passing of a Shengol by Mountbatten to Nehru. The history is being tweaked like that. You have a very despicable situation whereby history is being taught by whom? I don't know. Now, Professor Krishnasamy, tomorrow the law would be taught by the government. They will come and preside over the National Law University. Almost, the Sadguru is almost near your university, and I'm sure that you need to count the hours when he is going to completely take control of the legal discourse in this country. The astrologers will teach you science. These are the times like that. So, when the Prime Minister attained the status of the high priest of a ceremony, I feel the secularism is threatened. I feel secularism is threatened. I don't want to mince my words there, because I'm supposed to speak out. And please don't worry, Professor Krishnasamy, I have spoken the same thing in the parliament when all the big and mighty were there. So you don't be worried about, I mean, I am here speaking and you're sitting here, don't worry about that. Now, see the constitutional scheme of things. It was with regard to the inclusivity part of it. I'm sure about it. Professor Mohan Gopal talked in terms of Sri Narayana Guru. I would say that. I admire the teachings of Sri Narayana Guru. But let us know the status of inclusivity in this country now. Let us not obfuscate 20 crore people in this country do not have a representation in the executive. Can you imagine such a situation? Can a country like ours, which wants to be a modern nation, evolve by secluding people? This is my question. So these three cardinal principles which are absolutely required for ensuring that the constitutional schemes of things exist, prevail, and the unity of the country is naturally preserved. These are being tweaked under tremendous stress. Now, I don't want to talk about institutions. Mr. Qureshi was here, who headed the election commission. Professor Krishnasamy, if my time is out, he can just put the finger up.
1 minute?
1 minute. He is constrained and compelled to give me 1 more minute, okay. Institutions. Now there is a scheme here in the country. If you can't castrate an institution, you choreograph it. If you can't choreograph an institution, you dismantle it. Kadankaru. The parliament is being castrated. Election commission is already castrated. Planning commission was actually dismantled. I don't want to talk about the judiciary. You know what is happening in judicial. So, if you don't have institutions, the constitution expected the country to thrive on the shoulders of these institutions. But instead of strengthening the institutions, there has been a dismantling, devastating effect. So, just to sum up my very brief interaction, I would say that the unity of the country can be preserved only by protecting these three cardinal principles. And if you harp on the constitution, trust me, only democracy can protect the constitution of this great country, nothing else. Thank you.
ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಜಾನ್ ಬ್ರಿಟರ್ಸ್ ಅವರ ಭಾಷಣನ ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ಪ್ರಜಾಪ್ರಭುತ್ವ ಕಾಪಾಡುವುದಿಲ್ಲ, ಪ್ರಜಾಪ್ರಭುತ್ವವಷ್ಟೇ ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ಕಾಪಾಡಬಲ್ಲದು ಅಂತ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಅವರು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಜಿ ಮೋಹನ್ ಗೋಪಾಲ್ ಅವರ ಸಂವಿಧಾನ ವರ್ಬ್ ಅಥವಾ ನಾವು ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಆಪೋಸಿಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಡೂಯಿಂಗ್, ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ಡೂಯಿಂಗ್, ಅದು ವಿರುದ್ಧವಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದರು. ಈ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಏಕತೆ ಬೇಕಂತಂದರೆ ಮೂರು ಮಹತ್ವದ ಕೆಲಸಗಳನ್ನು ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ಪ್ರೊಟೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದು ಯಾವುದು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಪ್ರಜಾಪ್ರಭುತ್ವ, ಒಕ್ಕೂಟ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಮತ್ತು ಜಾತ್ಯತೀತತೆ ಅಂತ ಅವರು ಅಭಿಮತ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸಿದರು. ಅವರು ಒಕ್ಕೂಟ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಒಕ್ಕೂಟ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಅಪಾಯದಲ್ಲಿದೆ, ಹಣಕಾಸು ಹಂಚಿಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮಟ್ಟದ ತಾರತಮ್ಯವಿದೆ, ಮತ್ತು ಅಡ್ಮಿನಿಸ್ಟ್ರೇಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿ ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಪವರ್ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಮತ್ತು ರಾಜ್ಯಗಳು ಮಾರ್ಜಿನಲೈಸ್ ಆಗ್ತಿದ್ದಾವೆ ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿಸಿದರು. ಹಾಗೆ ಜಾತ್ಯತೀತತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತನಾಡ್ತಾ ಪ್ರಧಾನಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಜನರು ಮತ್ತು ಜನಜೀವನ ಕನ್ಸರ್ನ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು. ಅವರು ಮಣಿಪುರಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗದ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ವಿಷಯಗಳನ್ನು ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಅದು ಹಾಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ರೈಲ್ವೆ ಸ್ಟೇಷನ್ಗಳಿಗೆ ಹೋಗೋ ಒಂದಷ್ಟು ವಿಷಯಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡಿದರು. ಮತ್ತು ಅವರು ಪ್ರಧಾನಿಯೇ ಅರ್ಚಕನಾಗ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಜಾತ್ಯತೀತತೆ ಈ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಉಳಿಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಅಂತ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ಮತ್ತು ಅವರು ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಇನ್ಕ್ಲೂಸಿವಿಟಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರು, ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳುವಿಕೆ. ನಾರಾಯಣ್ ಗೌರ್ನ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಪ್ರಸ್ತಾಪ ಮಾಡಿ ಈ ಕಂಟೆಂಪ್ರರಿ ಟೈಮ್ಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಸಮಕಾಲೀನ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳುವಿಕೆಗೆ ಏನಾಗಿದೆ, ನಾವು ಏಕತೆಯನ್ನು ಎಸ್ಟಾಬ್ಲಿಷ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು, ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಆ ಒಂದು ಇನ್ಕ್ಲೂಸಿವಿಟಿಯನ್ನು ನಾವು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಕನ್ಸರ್ನ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು. ಅದು ಯಾವುದೂ ಈ ಸಮಕಾಲೀನ ಸಂದರ್ಭಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಅದರಿಂದ ದೇಶ ಒಂದಾಗಿ ಉಳ್ಕೋಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ, ಏಕತೆ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೇಕಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಜಾಪ್ರಭುತ್ವ, ಒಕ್ಕೂಟ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆ ಮತ್ತು ಜಾತ್ಯತೀತೆಯನ್ನು ಕಾಪಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಕರ್ತವ್ಯ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಜಾನ್ ಬಿಟಾಸ್ ಅವರು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಟ್ರು. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
So while designing this panel, Dr. Britas, we had anticipated many issues, but we not anticipated that we would have a political debate about Kerala. That we had not anticipated. We didn't realize, we didn't think through the idea that both of you might have a different view on, no, I take that. So the design of the panel was motivated by the need to think about constitutions and constitutional culture beyond politics. So we were concerned and interested in asking, what is the place of the constitution beyond politics? So we were not directly interested either in the main political institutions, what parliament must do, what parties must do. We were very interested in what the non-political world must do. You know, what is its place in culture? What is the role of the media? What is the role of education? And all the members of the panel have actually done that work, and I'm personally aware that they have spent much of their time doing that work. Hence they are on the panel. We also thought that Dr. Bezwada Wilson would talk about his work in a very different social movement sense as to how do we think about the place of the Constitution. And this is, and I'm going to say two more lines before I invite the panel back in and then turn to the audience. The idea that politics, and I see that both Shruti and Dr. Britas have gone in the same direction. The idea that democracy is salvation is a strange one for those who argue that authoritarianism is a problem, because authoritarianism is democratically sanctioned. So I find it very strange to hear the argument that what will save the Constitution is more democracy or a more robust democratic practice. I find it rather surprising, because I think that we know from the history of democracy across 200 years, across the world, that unrestrained democratic electoral practice does not sustain constitutional regimes. That is what world history teaches us. And hence the question, what is the place of culture? And what is the place of a constitutional consciousness that sustains democratic practice? So that's the context in which we frame the panel. The way I understood our panelists rolling out is that Professor Kapila took the view that constitutions, at least the Indian constitution and its particular evolution, suggests that culture and consciousness is not the primary vectors, not the primary forces to sustain constitutionalism. And Dr. Britas also took the view that democratic practice, democracy, more democracy, is essential to sustain the constitution. I don't think there can be an argument with that. We are not talking about a constitutional regime that is not democratic. We are talking about constitutional democracies. And that's what the 5 panels of this theme have focused on. Professor Mohan Gopal has done the work on Narayan Guru and at least puts forth a wellspring, a indigenous cultural source from which we can push for a constitutional normativity. We know that in the state of Karnataka, our engagement with Basavanna is a similar attempt. It's an attempt to use historical rooted cultural resources to have an interesting new conversation about the constitution. Now, these may be successful, these may be attractive to some, unattractive to others, but I think thinking about these resources is critical, if at least for those who believe that politics is not all there is in our social and collective lives. Politics has its place, but too much politics is also the bane of societies. So I would not go down that path. I think we need independent institutions. My role and the university's role is to be that kind of independent, non-political space. Non-political, at least in this sense. Dr. Anurag Bhaskar spoke about the various ways in which legal initiatives have addressed the questions of constitutional culture, but have a long way to go. And there are pressures of both inclusiveness and pressures of imagination that legal initiatives have to embrace in a much more fuller way. So much for summary and response. As moderator, I will not speak anymore. I'm going to invite the panel once again before I turn to all of you patiently in the audience. I'm going to invite the panelists once again to answer a how question. We might have complex theoretical views about the relationship between politics, culture, democracy, constitutions, all of that. If I can just invite the panelists to take a minute each to just talk about the how. Today, cultural symbolism and evocation matter in a way that they may not even have mattered in 1950. So we are in a different, at least in a different cultural moment, and I think it's worth reflecting a little bit about the how. What kind of practice do you think shows promise? What is interesting to you? What do you think shows us some hope about sustaining constitutional values and constitutional culture? I'll start with Dr. Anurag, who's furthest away from me. Please, Anurag.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, that in any society, the discourse which keeps on happening is the one in which how we think of constitution, what it is, it clashes with what the dominant social or political discourse wants it to be about. So that contestation has happened over history in India as well, and it keeps on happening even now. Sometimes when we adopted the constitution, the hope with the constitution that it will bring a change, it will replace the social, it was very high. And with time we saw that the social or the society was not willing to adopt the constitution in the way that we had initially hoped. So that contestation has been happening. It happens even now in different ways. And in today's time, invoking the constitution, invoking the language of the constitution contributes to our belief that constitution still matters And no matter where social discourse or political discourse is going, but we show our hope that we are standing by it, and we see that through different engagements that have been happening in last several decades and not just in the last few years. So I think engagement with the Constitution by the citizens offers a hope, and that hope is precious because we cannot give away that hope in the long run.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Mohan Gopal?
Thank you very much. I just want to reassure the Vice-Chancellor that neither I nor Dr. Brittas are really political. I know, I'll just explain in a minute. I've never had a membership of the Congress Party in my life. 50 years ago, half a century ago, I was president of the National Students' Union of India. Okay? Not of the and still I did not become a member of the Congress Party, even in that capacity. I left any involvement in politics half a century ago, but I have remained, as you know,
yes,
completely independent from political parties, but trying to engage with political forces to support social democratic causes. And I'm glad to say that I appreciate a lot of the work that the LDF government does in Kerala, and I'm very engaged with them. And so I'm not taking, and Dr. Brittas, to explain, is basically a TV celebrity. He's not a politician, and that's why he reacted like this. An experienced politician would not have reacted like this and said that I'm a congressman. That's kind of a compliment he was paying to me, but unfortunately not true. So we are not politicians. We didn't bring any political politics of Kerala here.
Sure.
Now, that's the first point. Second point is, yes, I agree with you that we should not look within silos to find solutions. We are actually thinking about the human condition. And we know that in our country, the human condition of 90% of the people is deplorable. And how do we understand it? How do we diagnose it? How do we respond to it? And so I was offering the thinking of Dr. Ambedkar, Narayana Guru, Basavanna is very much in that mix, Kabir Das is very much in that mix. There's a lot of ideas that we can draw from to chart a way forward to improve the human conditions of the people in the subcontinent, which is probably, this subcontinent is probably home to the most wretched human condition on earth, and we have to change that. So that's where I was not looking at traditional politics. But having said that, I cannot be persuaded that we should put politics into a silo and say this is politics, this is social, this is cultural. These are useful analytical tools. For example, doctors use analytical tools to analyze the human body, but never forgetting that the human body is an integrated, interconnected mechanism, not only within itself, but with the whole ecosystem. So politics is not to be studied as a silo. And so we cannot shun something because it's political. Because politics simply has to do with the manner in which power is constituted and exercised. And that can come from various sources, economic, social, and so on. I agree with Mr. Brittas that ultimately democracy is only democracy that will save this identity of this constitution, to borrow a phrase used by the Supreme Court when dealing with basic structure, identity of the constitution. This is a democratic constitution. We cannot look at the constitution as an administrative document, but as representing a certain political, social, economic aspiration, a certain human aspiration. And therefore, I think we should also understand democracy from its two literal words, demos and kratos. Kratos means power, demos means common people. So democracy is a human condition in which power rests in demos, in common people. And so we need constitutions. Constitutions must emerge from that idea that Kratos is in the hands of demos. And only that will protect a democratic constitution, which is what, if I may speak for him, I think Mr. Britas was saying that yes, Putin's constitution democracy is a threat to that constitution. But the Indian constitution, which emerged from a people's struggle, from the struggle of common masses, as Anurag pointed out, can only be protected by democracy. It is not the source of democracy. It is not independent of democracy. So I think we must remember that. And when we look at ways to, as you said, I agree with you, we have to break all these silos and look at culture and consciousness and ways of thinking and ontology and epistemology and address the issue of how to improve our human condition. And that's where I think there's great promise in the idea of Narayana Guru that the Hindu is really a questionable concept, because it is using that idea that democracy is being attacked. What is being attacked is not the constitution. It is the idea of Hindu versus democracy. The constitution simply happens to be an institution in the middle. So therefore I think we should draw on all these things, which is what you're doing. And if you want us to talk Kerala politics, then you have to get
that will be another day.
No, two different people, not us, not the two of us.
Professor Shruti, please.
Thank you. Yeah. So let me just clarify.
If you can just tilt it this way, yeah. No, like this, yeah.
Okay, is that better? Okay, thank you. So let me just clarify. I didn't take a normative position on whether more democracy or more politics is needed. What I did was try and sort of situate and contextualize the place of the Constitution in relation to, as it were, the political and the social. And that's a structural problem. It's the rules of the game is what I'm referring to. And we certainly now are at a moment of, it's not remaking, but re-evaluation, which is what we're also doing here, and how to go forward, as you say. What next? So in that context, I just wanted to clarify the rules and the abstract, actually, separation of these realms, which actually exists. Not everything is political, you're quite right. But what has happened, to borrow another political theorist's phrase, is that in India there is a despotism of politics. Politics rules. If I work in England, there I'm not sure whether politicians actually have that much power. Bankers, consultants, the City of London is shaping that country more powerfully. I could say that about America too. But there is no equivocation that it is actually the political realm that drives things in this country. And how did we come to that point? I wanted to lay that out. It had an emancipatory potential, thinking behind it, because of the caste question, but which also then means that it is open. It is not a closed door. And if you ask me what the how is, then I suppose the judiciary and the judicial realm should rearm itself. I mean, if it feels that, that this is there is a separation to be had, then it is their fight. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Britas.
Thank you, Professor Sudhi Krishnasamy. And we never intended to, fight here actually. I have highest regard for Professor. But the first time I am knowing that NSU is not part of the Congress. No, correct, okay. Technically, okay, fine. Anyway, no, he is one person, he is one person whom I look at, I would say, with a lot of admiration. And with impeccable integrity, he handles things.
I've been very critical of the Congress.
Yeah, correct. No, I know, sir. Since he said that, you see, I'm a journalist, primarily I had to give it back, that's all. Okay. And sir, see, I'm a journalist, and since you talked about constitutional culture, the relevance of media, everything, I did a bit of research in media also. Actually, my PhD from JNU is from media. How the media molds the society. when you talk in terms of constitutional culture, it contains the attitudes, aspirations and sentiments of the citizens. That is primarily the constitutional culture. And see, politics is such a relative term. You said too much of politics is not desirable. But when I would say that a vacuum is highly dangerous, because politics is something which gives us a window to see the society. So if there is no politics, that means it's status quo, I would say that, or rather even retrograde. And one interesting thing which I would tell you, because it's just to supplement Professor Mohan Gopal, the reform movements in India, especially in the South, had so much of impact on the legislations and legal advancements this patch of land had made. Why is it that the South is distinctly different from the North? That I would say it's because of the fertile reform movements the South had, whereas the cow belt didn't have anything like that. So constitutional culture naturally, it's an offshoot of all these cultural aspirations, social aspirations, and I would fully concur with you that it can't be, peripherally taken as one layer. It should be multi-layered and should be rooted in the ground in the society. Anyway, I'm glad that this has happened as a very productive discourse, and this is something, a pedestal which we can continue to, carry on in future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have time for 2 questions, and I'll just take 2 questions and stop. So yes, the gentleman, no, behind, yes.
Thank you. It's more of a comment than a question. The issue is that freedom of association and protest is absolutely essential for creating a constitutional advancement of consciousness and culture. That is absent and has been absent for a long time, irrespective of the political hue of the party in power at the center or the state. And that needs to be done. The castration of institutions is also not a new phenomenon. It has reached a new high. But please remember that TADA was passed in 1985 in a 48-minute discussion with 17 members participating. Divide that with in terms of time and you'll know the substantiveness of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. Yes, this person. Here.
When you're talking about reservations for castes as such, so when you talk about the motive of reservations, basically for equality and equity at the end of the day, right? But when you look into the arguments made by K.K. Venugopal in one of the cases, it was highlighted that political parties take this reservation policy for their own benefits. So in this situation, how do you ensure that the main purpose of reservation is served and not misused in the guise of equality and equity?
So I'll take the first question as being related to this panel and the second question as having no relationship to this panel. We should have asked that question in the second panel, which was on equality and equity a long time ago. So I'll just have the, yeah, please. Maybe we take one more question that's related to the panel and then we can close.
Good afternoon. Sir, I want to know about that, whether we are telling that the states in South India giving more money than North India, in the states in North India. But not only in this case, BJP government, while in the Congress government also in 1967, I think the CM of Tamil Nadu, CN Annadurai told that Vadakke Valgirathu, Tekke Theigirathu. That means northern part of India is developed, it is looting more money, and southern part is not as much get money. I want to know that whether it is somewhat developed areas, while comparing the northern part of India, the southern part of India is somewhat developed. When we don't need to give the money, how they become development, how the infrastructures may be developed there. I want to know I want to know about that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would have dissuaded you as well, because we had Professor Govinda Rao talking about fiscal federalism yesterday afternoon in great detail. So we discussed this question, but Dr. Britas raised it, so I'll take your question to be to him. Would anyone in the panel want to address the first question? Yes, please. On the freedom of association. Yeah, please. Sir.
Yeah, the first question, I want to acknowledge one of the most important champions of human rights in our country, Mr. Ravi Nair, is the one who raised this question, and I thank him for his presence and his question. Yesterday I was speaking in Delhi in more detail on this issue. The attack is basically on 19(1)(a), freedom of speech, and freedom of association. These two things are being attacked viciously, concentrated attack. And so we have to find, as lawyers, I think more effective strategies to re-theorize some of these fundamental rights so that they can be better protected and better defended. I entirely agree with him. It's a huge issue. I do think that the second question is relevant to what I said, because I referred to the word reservation. And I think, and I do want to say that I want to clarify just this to the young scholar who spoke, or young person who spoke, that to Ambedkar it was very clear that reservation is a tool for representation. Reservation is not for equity, not for poverty alleviation, nothing. Because like India wants representation in the Security Council because we are the most populous country in the world. Whether we are rich or poor has nothing to do with it. The Security Council lacks legitimacy without India being a permanent member. Similarly, when you have national institutions, judicial, executive and legislature, where there is no representation for vast sections of the communities of India, they lack legitimacy. So we want representation. And reservation is only a tool. And if that tool is not effective, which it is proving to be, we can throw that tool away. Reservation is a Chaturvarnya idea, where jobs are reserved for different people on the basis of their birth. And that's why Ambedkar never used it in 1930. He said, regulate recruitment into public employment so as to ensure due and adequate representation of all communities. That's our goal. We must have representation of all communities.
Yeah, Professor Shruti wanted a quick response.
Yeah,
yes.
just to say that actually the question of reservation is actually a cultural one. It has had a cultural politics behind it, and that the Constitution itself now is a cultural symbol. So this is why those who are opposing, say, the ruling, as it were, current politics, they are deploying the Constitution as a cultural symbol and as something that needs defending. So I think it's actually more vexed. But I also just wanted to clarify and agree and restate that the reservation issue, as far as I see it, is not an issue of equity, and that Ambedkar was actually interested in a democratic design in which this became the key instrument, precisely because castes are separated by cultural habit and social institution.
Dr. Britas, for the last comment.
There was a question with regard to that, the financial powers and fiscal powers and divisive thing. You're absolutely correct. This tendency or the trend has been always there. If you look at the state list, concurrent list, central list, many a time legislations are being made on even on the state list. Two examples I will tell you. The farm bills, second the cooperative act which came. These are actually the state, powers of the states. But recently legislations have been made on that. So there has been a consistent effort, irrespective of the parties in power, I would say that. There has been a tendency to concentrate power at Delhi. And your question, of course, and despite getting the resources, how is it that the states in South has developed? It's not that, we don't get resources. We are not getting resources in a justifiable manner, that's what I'm saying. Injustice has been done to us. And third aspect I would tell you, there is a tendency which has come. See, even those areas which are being looked at by the states, I will tell you one typical area. Kerala has the finest public distribution system in the country, or even in the world, I would say that. 95 lakh ration card holders, 15,000 ration shops. It means, I mean, how many? Could be something like 10 ration shops in the village. All of a sudden, there is a decision by the center. The center will directly sell rice, atta, everything, bypassing the PDS system of the state governments. This is how areas after areas, verticals after verticals, which are supposed to be the prerogative of the state governments, are being taken over by the central government. Fourth point I will tell you, there is something called centrally sponsored schemes. There are states like Kerala which would have actually crossed the threshold. For example, a school in a village, we have already crossed the threshold. So we are unable to avail the centrally sponsored schemes to Kerala. So in effect, it's like punish for the performance. Perform and perish. That's a new slogan that is coming up. This is all what I said about it.
Thank you. So may I invite the audience to thank our panel for the wonderful session. And we close the panel now, and with this the themes, and we move on to a closing valedictory in about an hour's time. Thank you very much.